Jensen, Scotty, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone, kicking off the final hour of the show. Let's talk a little college hoops. Aaron Torres, Fox Sports Radio, right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Aaron, how you doing, man?
Aaron.
I'm doing well, fellas. How are we doing today?
Good.
None of us are doing as well as BYU is right now in basketball. They've got it cruising down there. What jumped out at you when you've seen this team live and up close in person?
Yeah, I really thought even when they were struggling, I didn't think they were as far off as, admittedly, maybe even the fan base thought. Obviously, only following it from a distance, but I think early on, there was so much excitement over the course of the offseason. I think that I maybe had played a small role in it because I was kind of seeing from a distance what they were doing and the excitement around that team. But, I think we can go back in hindsight and say, okay, you lose your or I guess it was your road opener in league play to Houston. Well, that's forgivable. A home loss to Texas Tech doesn't look nearly as bad. And then 4-point loss to TCU, 1-point loss to Utah. All of a sudden, that's not great and that's not acceptable and that's not what the standard was expected to be, but you weren't that far off. It wasn't a 20-point loss to TCU or anything like that. Texas Tech is clearly a very good team, and Utah, we know, a rivalry game, and Utah, whatever, I know we'll get into in a minute. So I always thought that they probably weren't as far off, but I think what's obvious is pretty much what everybody else knows is, really seem to lean on the veterans, seem to lean on the guys that not only were in the program, but a guy like Mawit Mag, who, has played a lot of high leverage college basketball, Kaba Keita, et cetera. So I think it's just relying on the vets, believing in who you are, and then just operating, just an insane level with Richie Saunders playing like an all Big 12 guy, Dallin Hall playing well, et cetera. So, basically when I was in Provo a few weeks ago, I think to me it was more confirmation bias than anything. But I will also acknowledge, did I think they were going to then go to Iowa State, go to Arizona, get all these wins? I didn't. But they are the hottest team in college hoops right now. We're certainly in the short conversation. And it's been fun to watch both in person and then also from a distance after I visited Provo a few weeks ago.
Well, from your perspective, just talk about this 7-game win streak, because 4 of the 7 are on the road: West Virginia, Arizona, Arizona State, Iowa State, and then 3 of them at home: Kansas State, Kansas, and West Virginia. Just talk about the significance of this 7-game win streak, because Scotty and I were trying to put it in terms. Finishing the season like this with these 7 wins is how big, especially for when you're talking about seeding for the conference tournament, seeding for the NCAA tournament, and then your top 25 rankings.
Yeah, I think a few variables there is, one, it's crazy because it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about them as a bubble team. Now, I always thought that they were going to eventually play themselves off of it, but you got to do it. And then I think to win the games that they have, certainly it just makes a statement nationally. But there's also, the natural byproducts of that. You're now off the bubble. Are you an 8 seed? Are you a 7 seed at this point? Do you have to, win a game at the Big 12 tournament? I don't know all that. But the more listen, you guys know this, we all know it, is the better seed you get in an NCAA tournament, statistically, the better chances you have of advancing, because you're just playing in theory, a inferior opponent. The better seed you get, the worse the opponent is. So there's still work to be done, but I think getting that double bye into the quarters, which I believe became official last night, it means that it's less likely you take a bad loss once you get to Kansas City. It puts you in good position where you're probably going to be playing somebody pretty good in that opening game, and it just allows you to really, I think, 2 things: is just avoid bad losses that could hurt your seeding. And then really at that point, you're only getting good wins that would help your seeding as well in Kansas City.
So I think Seth Davis, a couple other people have mentioned this as well. I want to get your thoughts. I have a sneaking suspicion I know where you stand on this. But when and again, I know March and NCAA tournaments, it's about matchups, it's about seeding. I know there's a lot into it. But just from a talent-wise standpoint, if it lines up well for BYU, could you see this as a Final Four team?
Yeah, to me, listen, if you can win 7 straight in the Big 12, if you can, beat teams that you would be playing in a Sweet 16, Elite 8. Iowa State is a team that could very easily be in a Sweet 16. I still like Arizona, even though I know they're struggling. There's no reason you can't now, and I would kind of defer to you guys is, I don't know how much BYU fans like people talking about it because I know it hasn't happened. And until it happens, you don't want to put the cart before the horse. But yeah, no, I mean, I think the talent is there. And I go back to, again, a profile of the kind of team that has success in March is you have NBA level players in certain spots, but you also have veterans. And again, I know it's a conversation that has been had in Utah, but I don't know about if it's been talked about enough on the national level. As we talk about, these crazy coaching moves and, bringing in 7-8 new players, BYU is really the only team that, of that group that had a coaching change last year that has guys that were in the program that played in the NCAA tournament. And so I just think a Richie Saunders, a Dallin Hall, all those guys, they're not going to be intimidated by the moment. And that's just something that I'm not saying that it means that Louisville or Kentucky or Arkansas, if they make it, that means that those teams are going to lose or that means that it guarantees a BYU win. But it's not just having veteran guys, and it's not just having veteran guys that have played in the tournament. It's having veteran guys that have played in the tournament in your uniform. I think that's only an added benefit, and we'll see if it has that trickle down effect once we actually get a bracket here in about 10 days from now.
Aaron, where do you place the Big 12 right now, just in terms of all conference play? How strong are they?
In my opinion, I think it's the second best conference. I mean, it's hard to argue against the SEC. I know the Big Ten. Let me put it this way. I think the Big Ten is probably better first team to last team, which sounds crazy because it's a bigger conference. The Big 12, I do think, once you get past about team 7, team 8, it's really tough. But I think if this was like an ACC SEC challenge or an ACC whatever challenge where you just put the top 8 against the top 8, I think let me put it this way. I think there's probably more really good teams from team about 1 to 8 in the Big 12. But I think if you went 1 to 16, the Big 10 would probably have an advantage. We know, I'm not trying to be rude, but there's some dead weight at the bottom of this conference with Colorado, with Arizona State. I know Utah's going through their own thing right now with the coaching change, et cetera. So that's how I would kind of frame it, is that, in my opinion, 1 through 8, I would give actually a pretty sizable advantage to the Big 12. And then I think once you get past that, I think there are some spots on the schedule in the Big 12 where it's a little bit more manageable than maybe the Big 10.
What do you think of the news on Alex Jensen coming and taking over the Utes?
I'm going to actually bounce it back to you guys. I mean, I know his background. I know his history. Let me ask you, I understand that sports are kind of a copycat situation. I mean, is this in direct response to Kevin Young? I know he played it at Utah, but is this in direct response to, well, Kevin Young came from the NBA and it worked, but Kevin Young came from the NBA. There was an infrastructure in place. He hired a great staff with guys that had been in the college game. I guess I would ask you guys, Alex Jensen, I mean, you guys know much more about him than I do. I mean, does he come in understanding what the college game is? Does he come in understanding the kind of staff that he has to put together? And does he come in, frankly, with the financial backing that I know BYU had? And I know that, we're talking about a billionaire owner of the Jazz, so maybe it's a little bit different. But, these are the things that matter in these kind of hires. And I just wonder, did you do this because your rival did this, or did you do it because you believe this is the best move? And again, I'll defer to you guys, and I'm curious, actually, I want to hear as much as you guys can share publicly, because I think those are the questions that have to be answered.
Well, in terms of the copycat situation, Alex Jensen was the first offer made when they eventually had to go Craig Smith. And so this was not the first time. This is not the first time they'd gone after Alex. Alex was in a situation, and there were things going on with the Jazz that made him want to stay. That's when the Jazz were really close in hopefully trying to make a run. And then he was a hot topic in terms of NBA head coaching, and I still think probably could have got himself a head coaching job. before the Quinn Snyder era ended here the way that it did in Utah. So it was not the first time that he had been presented the opportunity. So I can see why somebody would say that it could be a copycat situation, but Alex could have had the job 3 years ago or 4 years ago,
Right.
and just didn't quite line up in his timeline at that point. And then in terms of resources, that's $1 million question. And we've had people close to the program that have told us today that they're ready to increase their NIL fund about 3 or 4 times to where it was with Craig Smith. And if I'm Craig, I'm like, well, why not give me that and let me come back as a head coach? But I think
Didn't I just beat Kansas the week before I was let go?
Yeah, exactly.
Did that game not happen?
Yeah. And so, yes, I do think that Alex is the, smart enough guy realizing, like, look, I can take this job and I can cash your checks, but ultimately you're going to fire me in 2 or 3 years if you're not ready to invest at the NIL level. And Utah's assured him that apparently that they are willing to do that.
Well, first of all, thank you guys for that insight, because I was not aware that he had been actually offered the job, previously. And I think that does, line up a little bit with Kevin Young, who I know that the BYU people liked. I don't know if he was ever offered the job, but I know that they were aware of him and liked him, and whatever. So I think that's really interesting. And I think, as long as you have an understanding of what you need and that everybody's going in the same direction. And I do think this is the world that we're going towards. I don't think it has to be a quote unquote NBA guy. As a matter of fact, I think there can be some real detriments to it, but I do think it should be somebody younger. It should be somebody where there's alignment, and it should be somebody that kind of gets, hey, this is the world that we live in now. Listen, none of us love, annual free agency, with the transfer portal, and maybe even biannual free agency, because the portal kind of opens sometimes twice in a calendar year. I think we all like NIL, but we think there should be some sort of regulation as far as certain things. And so I just think as long as whoever's coming in understands that and isn't going to try to fight it. I was just doing my own show and I was talking about Miami hiring Duke's lead assistant, and I kind of just said, like, the days of hiring the 60-year-old guy that's going to fight it and, I don't like this and I don't like transfers and this guy entered the portal and I wasn't expecting, like, that's just the world that we live in. And so I think going young and having a guy that understands that is what's important. And so as long as he understands that, and as long as the people that are going to be supporting him in some way, shape, or form understand that this is the world that we're in, I say give it a go and see where it goes from here.
You headed out to this Big 12 tournament?
I am not headed to the Big 12 tournament. I traditionally have gone – I've actually been in Vegas the last couple of years for the Pac-12. With the Pac-12 obviously no longer being a thing, I just decided to stay home. There was some thoughts of going to Nashville for the SEC. I've been to the Big East many times. So, Casey, I've been to Kansas City, but the arena's beautiful and all that, but I am not headed to the Big 12 tournament, but anybody who is, you're going to get a great show. It's going to be a great event.
Are you
guys headed to the Big 12 tournament?
I am not. I do the games I do the play-by-play for Utah State. So I've got the Aggies in the Mountain West down in Vegas next week, and I want to get your thoughts there. They've been cruising along quite nicely until last week, where they took it on the chin a couple times. What are your thoughts on the Aggies in terms of seeding and the national thoughts on and the national perspective on them?
Yeah, I mean, all I would say is, one, obviously with the turnover on the coaching staff year over year, I'm just so impressed by the continuity within that program. And, maybe I'm in the minority, maybe I shouldn't be in the minority on this, but I think when you're talking about 3 losses and then being at New Mexico, at Boise State, at Colorado State, I know that Colorado State maybe isn't, quote unquote, an NCAA tournament caliber team, but we kind of know what Nico Medved is, what he's about, and what he's capable of. And so I don't view them as bad losses. I know maybe the net rankings or whatever would say that Colorado State isn't a great loss, but I don't necessarily see it in that manner. And then just overall with the team, listen, I think that, when you have a guy, we've talked about, veterans from the BYU perspective. I mean, Ian Martinez, I almost called him Ian Martin. I used to work with an Ian Martin, but Ian Martinez, dude's played a lot of college basketball, man. And, he's seen it all. He's done it all. There's limitations to the game, specifically the three-point shooting. But, I think that when I look at having a guy like that, either a fifth or sixth year guy, I forget, but he's played in a lot of big games. He's played at the high major level. And that's a dude that can carry you. And then you have nice pieces around him. I actually really like the team. Now, as you guys said, NCAA tournament, it's a matchup thing and things can change really quick. But every time I've seen Utah State this year, I actually do like them a lot. And I like how they would match up potentially in an NCAA tournament.
Well, we certainly appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out with us, and look forward to catching up with you again down the line.
My pleasure. Anytime. And I'll tell you, man, it's an exciting time for all three of those schools. And I love the carousel stuff, and you never want to see anybody lose their job, but I love the carousel stuff and the portal stuff. It's, some of my favorite stuff to cover over the course of a year. So I'll tell you, I'm excited to see what BYU can do this next month. Same with Utah State, but I'm also excited to see what Alex Jensen does and kind of what it means big picture for not only the program, but the league itself. I don't know if I have half a second. I'll say this. I was in BYU for the Kansas game, and I saw Utah was playing Kansas State the night before on that Monday, and I almost drove down for that game. So I'm excited to see just what the Utah situation, how that plays out. And I look forward to joining you guys in the future. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's have you hit for the cycle. We'll get you to a Utah State, Utah, BYU games in a weekend, man. We'll really make your time count.
You guys call Brett Yormark and Gloria Navarez, and you make sure the schedule aligns, and I'll be back. If we can get 3 home games in 4 days or whatever, I'll make the trip. I don't easy flight for me. I live in Los Angeles. So it was about an hour and a half flight. So you guys, like I said, you get Brett Yormark on the phone. You start working on that 25-26 schedule, and I'll make it happen. All right.
Done and done, man. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Aaron Torres, Fox Sports Radio, right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.